Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. Today I will present my paper PromptMark, a prompt-guided iterative feedback framework for source code watermarking. I myself, Ishtiaq Ahmed Fahad, and my two co-authors are Midha Mohammad Nafis Fuad and Kazi Saqib. We are from Institute of Information Technology, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. So let's begin with the problem overview. Before the uh, before the LLMs, we usually write the code by ourselves in hand in manual effort and have to debug the code and test and also write the documentation by ourselves. But one night and one tweet changed the whole world by the same movement, which is today we have launched ChatGPT. Try talking with it here. And by this launching of ChatGPT has added a new dimension of autonomy and software development tasks which we have explored and experiencing from the starting of 2022 of ChatGPT. Now we have the Gemini and Anthropic that is collaboratively helping us in writing code, completing code, debugging the code, and also refactoring the explaining the code at our convenience. Therefore, the AI has now have been awarded or have been known as the co-author that regularly assist ourselves to write code and also assist ourselves in pair programming and automated refactoring tasks. Now, what's the actual scenario? The trust versus the concern. In reality, it is seen that 84% of the developer actually use or plan to use the AI tools, and 69% of the reports suggested that it actually improved the productivity by using the AI agents in their regular life. But on the other side, 46% of the users don't trust the AI generated outputs, and 61% have experienced ethical and security concern about the AI code. So we can see the both side of the AI generated code. But what the actual study and experiment really says, we can see a snapshot from a 2025 report that AI authored code contains worse bugs than the software crafted human. Alongside, we also experienced that developers caught VS Code adding Copilot as a co-author without permission and forced rollback. That means AI nowadays are very regular in our development task, and sometimes they also claim their authorship even if they didn't participate in writing the code by themselves. So that means it's been a serious concern about the authorship of the AI authored and generated code. So how to fix this? To fix this issue, we should imply the traceability, accountability, and security of the AI generated code which we can get from the watermarking paradigm. It is actually a promising solution to embed a hidden verifiable signal in AI generated code which is actually hidden and embedded inside the code that is not visible in bare eyes from the external system. So basically, Watermark enables the verifiable authorship, improve the trust, and strengthen the security in AI-generated source code. So how can Watermark help us here? So if we see this original non-Watermark code, we can see it's a very basic code to determine whether a number is prime or not. And on the right side, we can see the Watermark version where we can see some obfuscated variable names and the function signatures mentioned here as a means of watermark. So this is a very naive way to express the watermark where we can see the function name and variable name and the loop structure like using while infinite loop or condition based loop is also a carrier of the watermarks. So if we talk about the general scheme how watermark works, it is actually divided into two parts. One is called the generation phase and another one is called the detection phase. So in the generation phase, we can see that we have the prompt and a secret key that in combined is passed to the LLM, then it generates the watermark version of the code, and then in the detection phase, we can see that we have a watermark version of the code and also the secret key, which is then passed into the statistical test of the code, and then it is finally a watermark version of the code. So basically, the core challenges in watermarking the code is that the source code is fragile. We cannot embed the watermark in any tokens or any part of the code because it can seriously hamper the functionality of the code. So keeping this constraint in our mind, we have to design the system of watermarking so that it can also imply the security and authorship of the actual author and does not break the functionality during the execution phase. So let's now understand what the recent study says about watermarking and what are the approaches they have followed so far. So we have categorized the whole study paradigm into 6 different categories to ease ourselves to explain the actual research we have done in this field. So let's start with the token level statistical watermark, the most commonly widely used method in watermarking source code. We can see that they have shown that in their watermarking process they divide the vocabulary into red or grid segments, and based on this red or grid portion we can see that they are claiming whether the code is watermarked or not. So here we can see that their actual strategy is to embed the watermark into the high entropy region and avoid the low entropy region. That means which are the reserved keyword like the for statement or the while keyword, something like that. So in this way they select the high entropy tokens only and embed the watermarks based on the selection process, and finally they use the z-score to statistically define whether the code is watermarked or not. But the issue is here in this process they require the access to the model architecture that is not suitable for the API only or the proprietary models, and also not robust for the large code base as well. Now for the second one we can have the syntax aware token watermark, where they actually perform syntactical changes to embed verifiable watermarks. So this is another paper from ESCL which is known as a stone. So here in this paradigm what they do is that it's basically a syntax aware watermarking, which is an improved version of the previous method, where they actually watermark to those tokens which are actually non-syntactic. That means changing this token does not hamper the watermarking or the functionality of the generated code. So here they only make changes to the code which are actually non-syntax. Like here we can see that the equal symbol is something like that, which will actually break the code. So they actually embed the signal right here or in this percentage here. So in this respect or in this paper the issue is that it actually requires the access to model architecture, low capacity in keyword dense or short code snippet, not suitable for the proprietary model at well. The next one is the transformation based watermarking, which actually performs semantic preserving transformation as watermark carrier. So here in this case they have an embedding network and a code transformer, and then also an extraction network. So they basically target two natural challenges actually. So one is called the natural channel, which is basically the variable name or the comments known as the lexical portion of the code. Another one is the formal channel, which is actually the structural or syntactical or control flow level access of the code. So here in this code they actually embed the watermark into the variable name and the code transformation that they perform into these networks. The issue in this case is that they have to write individual AST for each of the languages. It also requires the fine-tuning to learn the pattern from these changes they have done in this training phase. It also a resource intensive process and not suitable with the proprietary model as well. Then the fourth one is the synonymous substitution watermark, where they replace some tokens with the synonymous tokens. So if we check the paper for this one, which is basically known as 2syn. So here they use some kind of synonymous keywords as mentioned in their rulebook that they have prepared as a predefined rule set. Whenever generating code they follow the rulebook and then replace the synonymous token, like here for loop they have replaced it with the while loop. And in this case the issue is that the synonymous substitution sometimes prone to break the code correctness. For example, if they replace the numpy max with the usual max of the Python, some computation intensive operation might break down due to these changes. Also it's basically language dependent and require predefined rulebook for the code base. So now if you want to learn more about the other studies and the in-depth analysis, you can check out my another paper, which is Can We Trust the Source? A systematic review of watermarking and attribution of AI generated code, that is published in IST journal in 2026. So now if we look into the identified gaps of the watermarking studies, we can have a comparison of the open source model versus the closed source or proprietary model. So the existing model actually require access to model architecture, which is possible for the open source model but not possible for the closed source model. It requires training or fine-tuning that is also possible by open source model but not for the closed source one. Then it actually evaluated in the black box API setting partially for the open source but not tested for the closed source model. If you check the feasibility in integrating it with the IDE, it is less feasible, but their method is not feasible for the closest model as well. And also for applicability with other types of model, open source are applicable, but the closed source one are not applicable. So we can see that the highly flexible and configurable and modifiable architecture of the open source models actually enables the existing approach to work on, but the less flexible or rigid or non-modifiable architecture is the actual concern for the existing studies or approach to be applicable in real world scenarios. Therefore, keeping the closed source model constraint that they are inaccessible in their architecture, but their intensive power of high instruction following capabilities actually modified or motivated us to take the stance that we can design an instruction guided black box watermarking framework, and which is our actual target in this research. And for that we have defined some research challenges so that we can solve these challenges throughout our methodology. The first one is, which source code feature can be embedded as secure verifiable pattern without losing the functionality. So in that case we can have the variable names, ASTs or CFG or other call graph. We have to define which one. Then we have how to modify or design the prompts so that we can embed the detectable pattern in source code. So in this case we can see that how watermarking approach in the white box scenario actually token and predict the next token in the following scheme, but for the black box we don't have access for this token prediction workflow as well as for the other part except the prompt, which is our actual tuning point that we will tune in our methodology. Finally, how to satisfy the multi-objective constraint like the constraint of correctly embedding watermark and also maintaining functional correctness of the generated code is another challenge that we will solve into this respect. So let's start with the methodology of our research. So as you can see that this is our actual figure of the whole methodology, which is divided into three phases: the prompt construction, iterative code generation, and watermarking detection phase. So let's begin with the first phase, which is prompt construction phase, which will actually address the two challenges: the challenge 1 to define the code feature, and the challenge 2 to define the actual prompts that will actually embed the watermark into the generated code. So to define the code feature, we assume a simple problem to write the Python code to add two numbers. So here during the generated code, the current location of the code is the final, and we have to generate the next token, which is marked as a black box. So let's see that how the white box approach actually predict this token and how can we adapt this process for ourselves. In white box approach, we have the access to the base vocabulary known as the model tokenizer, and we will run through this loop so that we can generate our final token. So in the first phase, they have the previous token, which is known as the current token, as final. We generate the hash of this version. Then based on this hash, we split this whole base vocabulary into two parts, named the green tokens and red tokens. Then from this one, we sample the most probable tokens, which is the result here, and then we actually predict our next token result. So that means this is our final version of the code. So for the black box approach, the concern is that we don't have any access to neither the model tokenizer or neither the larger probabilities that we saw in the previous slide. So that means we have to find a proxy of the vocabularies that can act as a vocabulary set as a watermarking carrier for black box model. So in that case, we have these options like the AST, but it's not possible as it's basically a structural feature, and same goes for the CFG and the call graph. So the only option left for us is that the name database, that means the variable set we have to modify according to our watermarking rules. So now we have the variable as watermarking carrier options, but the issue is that how many variables should we select and which one to we select? This is a burning question. So to narrow down this process, we narrow down from variable names to the alphabets that actually starts the variable, which is called as the initials of the variables. For example, the n starts for the variable name number. So now you can question that how feasible this idea is. I think this is a feasible idea because the selection space is countable, and also we can deterministically select the alphabets for our watermarking phase. So in this case we can see that using the word n we can have different numbers or different kinds of keywords that we can use as variable. So ultimately this combining 26 letter of the alphabet allows us the generation of a large number of words, which is actually as like the vocabulary that we have used in the previous white box approaches. So basically we have replaced the model tokenizer or base vocabulary of the white box approach with the English alphabets as a base vocabulary for our black box approach, which can ultimately generate this kind of different varieties of variables for our watermark version of the code. So in this black box approach, now we have to deal out to another next level challenges to define the green set, that it should generally be naturally and coherent identifier name, and the green set should be unpredictable by the adversary so that it cannot be easily predicted by the attackers. So in that case we have formed our first phase, the prompt construction phase, where we can see that the secret key, which is actually a key-based key generation process, and the human written code features, that is actually a character frequency analysis, help us to define the frequency-based token certification that ultimately define our algorithm to generate the code. So here we can see the rank frequency plot, which is plotted from for almost all the alphabets of the alphabets or English letters of the alphabets. So here we can see that we have a list which actually shows the total number of character or candidate set we can select, and the number of the mean value, which is actually the mean probability of appearing a green set in human written code. And we can see that from our empirical study we can found that if we select 10 to 12 candidate sets of the characters, it actually covers 52% to 62% of the appearance in natural code of the humans. So this is a very basic base numbers that we have to select the total number of green sets, and based on these numbers we can also detect the watermarking symbols as well. So this is the actual process where our code can be watermarked, or we can select the green set in a cryptographic manner. Basically it starts from the SHA, that means SHA cryptographic algorithm, which produces two different kinds of hashes. One is used for determining the list size, another one is to select the different alphabets letters from the set of alphabets, and lastly we use the Fisher-Yates shuffling algorithm along with the candidate pool that we have selected in the previous steps, and finally defining our green and red list for final prompt construction stages. So ultimately what we have found in this phase is that white box watermarking actually modify logit probabilities to split vocabulary, but in black box we actually cryptographically determine which green red set from English alphabets to be used as watermarking carriers. So the next phase or the phase 1.2 is that defining the prompts, which is basically derived from the system prompt of previous researches. And here we have selected some previous names from the prompts, and this is the ultimate prompt that we have used for watermarking. So we have divided this prompt into multiple phases, like the cryptographically generated green set letter has been added here. Then we have permissible token watermarking instruction in these two phases. Then we have self-defining feedback corporation, which we'll discuss in the future slide in more details. And lastly we have natural looking identifier generation instruction or constraint added at the last of the prompts. So cumulatively, if all these stages actually produces the final prompt that we have used for the generation phase, which is the next phase of our generation, known as the iterative code generation process, which actually deals with the challenge number 3 to multi-object constraint maintenance during the code generation process. So here this is the actual segment of the code generation block. So this is actually divided into two segments. One is the first one, known as the unit test. That means after generating a simple code, it checks that whether the generated code is correct or not. If not, then it goes again and generate the correct version of the code, and then if the code is correct, then it checks whether the code is watermark or not based on the watermark detection algorithm that will be discussed in the future slides. And based on this multiple constraint, they finally determine whether the code to be counted or not. So this is also inspired from another paper known as self-refinement of the LLMs, that actually helps them to get or to learn a more correct version of their generated code. So now the phase 3, which is actually the watermark detection phase, where we can see that we have actually two part, which is first one as the parsing code using AST, and another one is calculating score using p-value. So if we get a simple example here, first in the detection phase it extract the AST and select specific variables here. For example, we can see this one, the initials are marked with underlined and the bold characters. Then we pass this to calculate the gamma for the token initials, and ultimately calculate the p-value or compare the thresholds, which actually checks that whether the code is watermarked or not. So this is basically follow normal distribution, and we can see that the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis cumulatively find out whether our code is watermarked or not, and it's also agnostic to different sizes, as it can adjust the evaluation process based on the total number of tokens we have in the evaluation phase. So now we'll get to understand how the experiment was done and the process in details. So for our experiment, we have selected two widely used dataset, human eval and sanitized MVP. Then we have selected the Gemini and Claude model, two SOTA model used in different researches. Then we have defined two research questions for effectiveness and one for code quality, like how effective the PromptMark is embedding and detecting source code watermark, and what's the impact does PromptMark have on code quality. Then we define evaluation metrics, like the true positive rate, like what are the percentage of watermark code is actually detected as watermark, and what are the non-watermark code is falsely detected as watermark is known by the false positive rates. Then we have the TPR at fixed 1% and 5% rate, and that we have AURC to determine the detectability of this method. For code correctness, we use the code blue score and the pass percentage to understand the functional correctness of the code. So now to compare our approaches result, we compare it with suite watermarking approaches, which is basically a white box approach, works in the token level code watermarking approach published in ACL 2024. Then we have in context watermarking, basically prompting based text watermarking approach published in ICLR 2026. Then we start with our result analysis section, and for ablation study or to understand impact of our approach, we selected three different kinds of prompting strategies, like static strategy, comment based, and the refactor based strategies. So here we can see the results that in all the aspects our approach, the iterative and the iterative AGL have suppressed all the results from the baseline as the baselines method. We can see that for both of the data set, and also we can see that in our approach it also improves better than the other prompting strategies, which is also mean that our approach is quite capable in properly detect or determine whether a code is watermark or not. Then we can see that for the detectability, we evaluated the T percentage 1F, that means 5% false rate and 1% false rate in MVP, and PromptMark suppress all of the benchmarks and the other ablation prompting strategies in a greater margin, and same goes for the human eval as well. Now for the correctness, we can see that PromptMark achieves a higher rate of correctness in comparison to the baseline approach and no watermark approach. And for the structural integrity, the score in both of the dataset is quite similar, which is also similar to the non-watermark version of the code, which define that our watermarking does not impact severely the quality or the structural integrity of the code. So let's focus on the discussion. What we can also get from our discussion is that the iteration distribution, we can see that almost most of our cases, around 69.5% of the cases, the code is generated within the 2 iterations. That means it doesn't require the more number of iterations, and it can be achieved within a limited number of resources used. Also, if we talk about the resources, we can see that average token are 850 tokens per iterations, which is in cost for Sonnet 4, we can see that 1.5 cents only. And for the conversion speed, we can see that as 2 iteration is the most average or mostly used iteration phase, we can see that it's also an economically practical in commercial API integration phase as well. Now for the robustness to the code transformation, we can see that the robustness and the maintenance attacks decrease when we remove the comments, but not significantly. but when we perform any paraphrase version, or we can perform different random paraphrasing using GPT codecs, we can see a drastical drop here in 0.7139 from 0.9834. So this is actually highly resilient to common stripping but vulnerable to massive aggressive paraphrasing. So it leaves future work that we can extend to how we can make it more robust approach in future. So these are some examples. You can see that the yellow mark are the watermark carrier initials, which actually define the watermark version of the code, and same goes for this one. So finally, if we talk about the conclusion, it's a method. PromptMark is actually a method that is a prompt guided black box source code watermarking, and that utilizes the iterative feedback loop to jointly optimize for strong watermark detectability and higher functional code correctness. And also we perform the evaluation on SOTA models and datasets that prompting can serve as an effective approach to embed verifiable watermarks. You can find the details code in the following link. Thank you everyone to be with me throughout the whole presentation. If you have any question, you can check these contact details.